So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our November Progressive Roundtable. For all of you who've been waiting for us to start, every once in a while here in Congress, they only have so many meeting rooms, and we had a little conflict. The young man who always books our meeting rooms for us was introducing his very first piece of legislation today, and he had quite a little group here, and he was under the impression that we were going to start at 2. So life got a little interesting, so we're starting late, but we are starting, and away we go. Everybody out there watching, or most people out there who watch these things regularly, know that I'm Andrea Miller, and I am the executive director of People Demanding Action. And we have been doing these roundtables here on Capitol Hill literally for about 3 years. All my new guests, come on in, that's fine, that's just fine. I'm on camera. So no, you don't get to talk to me right this second in time. We'll come up with something. So I'll visit you when I bring up my other guest. We've got a lot of our local organizations here today, and then we are also expecting Representative Jim McGovern, who has promised to stop in. We've got David Daly from Bobby Scott's office. Liz Schuster is here from Food and Water Watch. We've got Jasmine Jefferson from our friends at Social Security Works. Carissa Miller from Daily Coast is in the house. Don't know if we're going to be able to talk her into saying a few words, and I'm sure that we can get Stephen Spitz to pop up and talk to us a little bit about really important to me personally piece of activism that we've been engaged in for a number of months in Northern Virginia. So I think what we may do is, Jasmine, do you want to come up and give us an update? Jasmine, you've been here a while. I'm going to get the folks that were here at 1, get them in, get them off, get them back to work. Yeah.
Work to do, guys. So much work to do. So as she said, I'm Jasmine Jefferson. I've met most of you. I work for Social Security Works, and so I refuse to be in the doldrums about the election. So let me start by saying that there's, like I said, there's a lot of work to do, especially pertaining to Social Security and Medicare. So Social Security Works is ready to be invested in that fight, and I think that we can definitely win and maintain the gains that we have made over the past few years. So just to cover a couple of things, let's go pre-election first. Before the election ever happened, the Social Security Administration announced that the cost of living adjustment for Social Security beneficiaries was going to be 0.3%, which is more than zero, which is what it's been for the past couple of years. But that's pretty much next to nothing. $4 a month is not going to do very much for beneficiaries. I mean, I said the other day, I was in New York speaking on election day, and I was like, well, it might get you like a slice of cheese from somewhere. I don't know. You can add cheese to your burger when you go somewhere. I don't know what $4 a month does for anyone, but it is there. The other thing that happens is when the cost of living adjustment isn't very high, the Medicare premiums also raise for a particular group of people. So Congress will have to move to fix that as well at the end of the Congress. But I'll say before the election, our plan was to push for Elizabeth Warren's Save Benefits Act, which was a bill that closed a corporate loophole, a tax loophole, and it gave beneficiaries a one-time payment of $581 that would replace the cost of living adjustment they didn't receive. I'll say that our plan has changed a bit because the political landscape is not there for that to move forward, but that doesn't mean that we can't fight for that in the upcoming Congress as well. We were in the process of working with some groups that we consider to be a little more bipartisan to see if we could gain some Republican support for that piece of legislation. And so we'll continue to look at that option, but probably not for the end of this year, just because the political landscape has changed. And speaking of which, moving into 2017, we are looking at a very different atmosphere than that we originally intended. With a Trump White House, and we already had a Republican Congress. I'll say we cannot predict what is going to happen in 2017. Donald Trump, during his election, was quite different than a regular Republican. He said that he would not touch Social Security. He said he would not touch Medicare. And that is a very different story than what we hear from, I'll say, Speaker Ryan, who would very well privatize Medicare and he would cut Social Security. And so the question and the thing that we'll be looking out for is who is actually in charge. We don't actually know if Donald Trump is going to be able to set policy priorities or if he's going to allow Speaker Ryan and Mitch McConnell to make the priorities clear for the upcoming Congress and the entire administration. And so I would ask that you all are vigilant in watching for anything that we think could come up in the next Congress that would intentionally cut Medicare or Social Security. And so one thing that we have heard already is that Speaker Ryan is looking to add some sort of Medicare changes as a provision in repealing the Affordable Care Act. We don't think that that's, well, not that we don't think, we know that that's not good for people. And so we would be pushing back hard, and part of our strategy, which is new for us, is we have a red state strategy. Because what we do know is that DC does not necessarily, or the thoughts in DC they don't reflect what people think. Republicans love Social Security. Like any normal person outside of DC who voted Republican or voted for Donald Trump probably loves it, maybe depends on Social Security, maybe depends on Medicare, depends on all these sorts of programs that I would say Speaker Ryan and others are looking to cut. And so our goal is to make sure that we have a group of people who are willing to push back against that, not just as progressive Democrats, but also Republicans, people who, again, like I said, love the program, but who aren't necessarily as organized as we have been within the progressive realm, to push back and call their members of Congress and say, hold on, you can pretend to do things, but no. We actually really love these programs, and so we won't allow you to cut Medicare. We won't allow you to privatize Medicare or to cut Social Security. And so Social Security Works will be working toward that in the next Congress. Like I said, that's new territory for us. We've been very successful, like I said, in the progressive realm, and hopefully we will be successful moving forward in this new atmosphere that we find ourselves in. Like I said, I'm hopeful. I've moved forward, and hopefully you all will join us in that fight moving forward, because I think we can be successful. Social Security is unique in that it is very bipartisan and it's loved. Medicare, the same thing. It's very loved and bipartisan. And so there are opportunities that we will have moving forward to work on this in the next Congress and with the next administration. So that's all I have. If anybody else has any questions, if not, I know the congressman is here and ready to talk, so I will not belabor the point. Thank you all for your time.
We are delighted that Congressman Jim McGovern has been able to join us this afternoon. I am going to bring Congressman McGovern up right now to talk about anything that he wants to talk about, because the entire world is a little upside down right now. So we are dying to get your take on whatever you choose to share with us.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I want to thank you not only for being here today, but for being there always for things that mean a lot to people who don't have much of a voice here in Washington. There's going to be a lot of analysis on what happened in this election, but I think the long and short of it is that we didn't get our message out because of a lot of you, because of a lot of people who supported Bernie. We ended up with one of the most progressive platforms in the history of politics. And if you actually took the time to look on Hillary's webpage, there were some very progressive economic policy positions, everything from free college tuition at public colleges and universities to paid parental leave to, I can go on right down the list. But the thing, I think one of the things that I learned was that a lot of people didn't seem to know about it. And I think part of that is because we live in a system now where the media seems to be more interested in personalities and scandals and I gotchas than they are in actual policy and actual positions of candidates. And I think that that's probably not going to change, and so that's why social media and alternative media outlets are going to be incredibly important, because we can have the best platform and the best issues, and even we could have a pretty good candidate, but if you can't get your message out, and then nobody knows what this is all about or what's at stake. Donald Trump, through his bombast, said he's angry. And a lot of people all across this country are angry, people who have been economically disenfranchised. But what those people who voted for him don't realize is that he's not their solution. I mean, in fact, they voted against their own self-interest when they voted for him. He's got a tax plan, the only one of the very few positions that he actually put on his webpage, which is if you are someone who earns what Donald Trump earns, you are thrilled. You died and went to heaven. But if you are in the middle class, or if you are struggling to get in the middle class, there's nothing for you. You get taken. And I think, and so I come before you feeling, very sad that that a lot of people in this country kind of missed an opportunity to actually build upon President Obama's legacy, even in the area of health care. She came out for a public option, which I believe would have either done one of two things. Would have either would have forced insurance companies to lower their prices, or it would have, more people would have gone into the public option, and you would have created a single-payer system in the process. I mean, there were some very, very good ideas that were presented by the Democrats in this campaign. So part of it is we didn't communicate as effectively as we should have. The other part of it is, and I think we need to be honest about this, is that there are a lot of people who embrace Donald Trump because of his bigotry. And I think, one of the things that all of us need to understand is that racism and sexism and bigotry and xenophobia and homophobia are alive and well in the United States of America. I don't believe that's where the majority of people in this country are, but there's a significant slice of this country that is there. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves about that, and there needs to be some candid conversations about how we confront that. Because, I will tell you, my 15-year-old daughter doesn't talk to me a lot about politics because I'm in politics. So if I was, if I did something else, she'd probably talk to me about politics. But on election night, she called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, horrified. She says, how could somebody who has said what he has said about women and girls, how could anybody vote for him? I mean, and she's, every day, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I mean, one of the things she wants to do is she's going to participate in the Million Women's March come January. She feels like she has to do something. She's 15, I mean, I tell people, the story of about a month ago, I spoke to a group of fifth graders in a upper middle class suburb in my district, and you always try to figure, like, what do you say to fifth graders that will keep them interested? But I noticed that everybody was quiet while I spoke. I talked about meeting President Obama. I talked about his dogs. I talked about his girls, and on and on and on. And they were all very attentive, but it struck me, fifth graders usually aren't that attentive. So that was over with. I said, anybody have any questions? And a little girl raised her hand up. She says, I have a question. She said, will I have to leave the country if Donald Trump is president? I said, well, why would you ask that? I said, were you born in the United States? I was born in the United States. I was born in Massachusetts. I said, well, what are you worried about? She said, well, my family's Muslim. So the damage that he has done, was there even before this election. I mean, anybody who's in 5th grade who was wondering whether or not they're going to be able to stay in this country, I mean, it's unconscionable. So here's the deal. So I was devastated on election night. I was very, very depressed on election night. But I woke up on November 9th and said, enough. I'm not gonna let him defeat me. I'm not going to, be so depressed that I want to withdraw. I'm not going to move out of the country. I'm not going to just sit around and complain and despair and point fingers. But I feel more determined than ever to roll up my sleeves and to fight back. I just came from an agriculture committee meeting where, they did their 18th hearing on SNAP, which used to be known as food stamps. They want to cut the program. I said to them, I'm going to tell you right now, if you go after this program and you want to cut it or block grant it or put in more hurdles so people can't get a food benefit, I'm putting you on notice now that you're in for one hell of a fight. We are going to fight you every step of the way. This is a time for people like us to come together and to organize and to fight harder and to fight smarter too. I mean, one of the things that I think the Trump campaign showed us is they outsmarted us on how to communicate to a lot of people who feel disenfranchised by the system. They outsmarted us on their communications approach, and I still am having trouble wrapping my brain around that, because to me it was so evident what the differences were. But you know what? You learn from your mistakes, and politics is about addition. A lot of those people who voted for him, who voted against their own self-interest, we need to get back into the fold. And at the same time, getting them back in the fold doesn't mean we give up on our progressive principles, or we don't talk about issues of race, or we don't fight for immigrants, or we don't fight for the environment. We do all of the above because, quite frankly, I think that's where a majority of people in this country are. And so, PDA, I think is going to be on the front lines here, and people are looking for an outlet to be involved in something, to help be part of a movement. And I think you're going to find your ranks are going to increase. There are people who are calling me who have never been involved in a political campaign before, who have never been involved in politics, some who have never voted before, who are now kicking themselves for not voting in the election. But they're looking to get involved. And so it is important that this is an opportunity for us to bring these people into the fold. I think some of you are going to be at this Million Women's March. You ought to have a table there. You ought to be signing people up, because we need more and more people up here knocking on the doors of our members of Congress. And I'll just conclude with this. I used to have a history professor who always used to end every class by saying the same thing. He used to say, the world will not get better on its own. And it used to annoy me, because it's like, why you keep on saying that? You know what? I now know what he was talking about. Nothing in this country, when you look through our long history, has ever gotten better on its own. I mean, people have come together and they've fought for change. I mean, my friend John Lewis was, we were talking about, he's been arrested like 150 times. The Civil Rights Movement, which produced the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, didn't just happen. People, like-minded people across the country came and made it happen. Even the Affordable Care Act, which we need to build on, not dismantle, didn't happen on its own. We need to continue to build these coalitions and these movements to move this country forward. And I got to tell you, you all know this already, but Donald Trump may be the president-elect, but this is your country every bit as his country, and you ought to also know that when he talks about mandates, well, I don't know how many mandates. He got 1 million fewer votes so far than Hillary got. And probably by the end of this, he'll have 2 million fewer votes than she had. By the way, she is beating him right now by a larger margin than John F. Kennedy, that won the presidency for John F. Kennedy and for Richard Nixon in 1960 and 1968. And I had another thing. We got to get rid of this damn electoral college. I mean, I don't understand why. I mean, I'm trying to explain to my 15-year-old daughter. What about democracy? I thought the majority win. I said, well, yeah, well, there's something not right when you lost by over 1 million votes, maybe 2 million votes, and you're president of the United States. I don't care where you live in this country, whether you live in California or you live in South Dakota or live in Massachusetts, our votes are all the same. So the idea that somehow 1 million people in this country, so far as the votes are still being counted, 1 million more people voted for her than him, and he's president, I'm sorry, we got to change that. So there's a lot of things we have to do. But we're entering a period of uncertainty, and it is going to be brutal. And it is not for the faint-hearted. But I think, and I just want to come here and say thank you for all your work, but I think there are enough of us who are patriots, who love this country, who are not going to let it be taken away by a demagogue who not only doesn't know anything about anything, but doesn't even have the intellectual curiosity to want to know anything about anything. And so what we do in the next 4 years, I think, is going to determine the future of this country for the next 4 decades. So I'm there for you, and I know you're there. We all got each other's backs here, but this is not the time to despair. This is the time to recharge our batteries and get out there and fight like hell. So thank you all for all you do. Thank you.
And as Congressman McGovern said, this is really the time for progressives to get out there and push our agenda. There was nothing wrong with our agenda. It's just we needed to communicate it better. And it's one thing to be the smartest people in the room, but when the rest of the country isn't necessarily there, you do have to make your message work for everybody. And unfortunately, that was one of the things that we really didn't see enough of, among other things. All right, we've got David Daly here, and I want to bring David up. David is with the Office of Representative Bobby Scott. David is Bobby's legislative director. I'm from Virginia, so I get to say Bobby because he's not here. Otherwise, it's Representative Scott. So I want to bring David up and get Representative David's take and on what we are going to be doing in the end of this Congress in the lame duck, getting ready to go into the 115th, which is going to be quite a wild ride. Now, we did pick up seats in both houses. There are now 193 Democrats, up from 188 in the House, and we have 48 in the Senate, up from, I believe we were at 46. So we did get some pickups. So the other side has always been incredibly effective when they are in the minority. We are going to have to pull a page out of their playbook and be very strategic in everything that we do. David, come on up.
Good afternoon. Again, David Daly. I'm Congressman Bobby Scott's legislative director. Congressman Scott represents the 3rd Congressional District of Virginia, and he is the ranking member, top Democrat, on the Education and the Workforce Committee. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but so we're now in the lame duck session. We're in this week, today and tomorrow, and then we break for Thanksgiving, and then we come back the week after, and then we're in the following week. The biggest thing we need to do is fund the government past December 9th. Initially, it looked like we were probably going to do a short-term CR into next year so that the Trump administration and the unified Republican government would be able to more or less dictate how the federal government's funded for the rest of the fiscal year. It seems like we'll probably be doing an omnibus or a minibus A minibus is a bunch of smaller appropriations bills, but much larger than a single appropriations bill. It's my understanding that the Republican leadership hasn't fully gotten direction from the president-elect if he wants to totally clear the deck for this fiscal year, or if he wants his people involved in dictating or working with the Republican Congress on what to do for the rest of the fiscal year. So that's still a question that the Republican leadership's working out. But December 9th is the deadline. If we don't pass anything by December 9th, we'll be facing a government shutdown. The other big thing, my boss is a conferee for some ed and workforce provisions to the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the annual defense policy bill. Congress has passed one every year for the last 50 years. It'd be pretty unprecedented if we didn't get one finished this year. It's a huge, huge piece of legislation. There are a lot of controversial provisions in there, as there always are. So that's something that I imagine we will get done this before the end of the year. There are a couple tax extenders that we need to do. Last December, we passed a $600 billion tax extension package. It made a lot of the annual tax extenders permanent, like the research and development tax extender. We locked in the enhancements to the Earned Income Tax Credit that President Obama included in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. We also made some improvements to the child tax credit, but we also made a lot of corporate special interest tax provisions permanent. But there are a handful of smaller temporary ones that are set to expire that we'll have to take up. A big labor issue, the United Mine Workers Pension Fund is facing solvency issues. And Congressman Scott's been very involved in this issue. And it's both their pension and a lot of their companies have gone bankrupt, so a lot of these miners, these union members are going to lose their health benefits at the end of the year. It's an interesting bill because it's very bipartisan because Republicans right now represent most of coal country. Congressman Scott is in no way pro-fossil fuel or pro-coal, but he's been making the argument that if a majority in this Congress are so adamantly pro-coal, they should be pro-coal miners too. And these guys, he went into the belly of a coal mine last month, and he saw firsthand the incredibly dangerous working conditions that these men and women work in every day. So they're making sure that the pension benefits and healthcare benefits they were promised are still there. So that's something that we got to deal with. The president recently sent to Congress a request for $11.6 billion war supplemental appropriations bill. That's tied into, we're still in Afghanistan, we still have folks in Iraq. A lot of this money is also tied to the administration's effort to combat ISIS. That's something that we got to work through. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was expected to come up in the lame duck. Because of the election results, Speaker Ryan has indicated that it will not come up in the lame duck. President-elect Trump has been against it from the very beginning. But I can't say for certain he won't reopen it and negotiate a better deal. So it's something that might, in some form or another, come up again next Congress. There's also there's a trade negotiation with the European Union, TTIP, right? That could be percolating along. Then tomorrow we are taking up this bill. I don't know why they're wasting their time on it because our current president will veto it. It would undermine the executive branch's ability to finalize rules in the last year of a president's term. Right now, the Congressional Review Act requires that if Congress is going to pass a resolution of disapproval for agency regulation, they have to kind of build a record for that one particular regulation. They can't roll them all into one bill. What they're proposing this week would allow them just to list all the regs that they don't like, and prevent them from taking effect. But the look back, right now, if this current administration had finalized any rule around May of this year, then the new administration has to go through the Administrative Procedures Act in order to undo it or propose a different type of rule. And the Administrative Procedures Act, it takes at least a year to get through. You have to have comment periods. You have to issue a proposed rule, have a comment period, answer all those comments, issue an updated rule, have another comment period, then issue the final rule, let that sit out there so people can digest it. So this would reach back to rules that were finalized earlier this year, and it's a weird thing. Spring 2016 isn't really the midnight in a president's term. He still had about 11 months left, and a lot of these rules have been percolating in the executive branch well beyond President Obama's 8-year term in office. So the other, looking ahead to the 115th Congress, which will get sworn in on Wednesday, January 4th. Again, it'll be the first time in more than a decade that Republicans have unified control of the federal government, White House, Senate, and the House of Representatives. In the House, this is a much larger majority that they had even under President Bush. We had about between 200 and 210 seats during the first 6 years of the Bush administration in the House. So that is a worry. There are two big things that, I guess 3 big things that the new administration wants to accomplish. One is an infrastructure bill. Have very little details on what that would look like. If we're going to be privatizing our highway system, that's probably not a good thing. But that is probably the one thing that I think some Democrats are somewhat interested in working with the new president on, depending on what it looks like and how it's paid for. One of the options, and again, this is a kind of a big disagreement in the Republican conference. The tax reformers want to, there's $2.6 trillion in offshore profits from American corporations that companies should just bring back and pay taxes on them. But they refuse to because they're holding out for a huge tax break on these profits. I've read that some Republicans want a 3.5% tax rate for these repatriated profits, which is a gigantic tax cut. It's just huge. The number they're now talking about is around 10%, and if that money was applied to offsetting a $1 trillion or a $500 billion infrastructure bill, that would raise about $150 billion. But the Ways and Means Chairman, the Ways and Means Committee is responsible for tax reform and writing the tax laws. He wants to, from what I've seen reported, he wants to use that money to offset any costs associated with tax reform. So infrastructure is one thing we will probably be able to work with the new administration on, depending what it looks like. But in the first month, Congress has not passed a fiscal year 2017 budget resolution. I know this gets really wonky, so if you have questions, talk to me after. I can explain the federal budget process. So since we haven't passed an FY17 budget resolution, it provides the new Congress, since we're still in fiscal year 17, to pass a budget resolution in January, which would include reconciliation instructions. Reconciliation doesn't really mean a whole lot in the House, but in the Senate, you can't filibuster a reconciliation bill. It can pass simple majority. So they want to use the reconciliation process to repeal or dismantle as much of the Affordable Care Act as they can. They can't get rid of the whole thing through reconciliation, but they can make it pretty bad where the whole program will just collapse. And then a couple months later, around March, when the new administration does submit their FY18 budget request, we will then, in the normal budget process, consider, and likely the two chambers will come together and pass, a fiscal year 18 budget resolution, which will include reconciliation instructions for tax reform. And we'll probably do that later in 2017. The issue with tax reform is everyone's talking about making it deficit neutral. I don't know, the Republicans define that a little bit differently, because whenever anyone up here right now proposes a spending increase for a particular program, they demand an offset, either with, well, they won't let us increase taxes, but they demand an offset with spending cuts elsewhere. They don't have that rule for tax cuts. Tax cuts do cost the federal treasury money. They do increase the deficit. And if the current incoming president, President-elect Trump, he's proposed the largest tax cut in American history, trillions and trillions of dollars. If you thought George Bush's tax cut was huge, this is going to be on a whole nother level. But they want it to be deficit neutral, whatever that means. That'll be hard to do, but we will see. And then just the rest. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see who's nominated to fill cabinet positions. Just to plug some of the stuff that my boss has been working on, that the Progressive Democrats of America should be interested in. Criminal justice reform. The election has kind of changed what could happen. There were two bills, that were percolating along. That's Chairman Chuck Grassley and Chairman Bob Goodlatte introduced, that my boss is very much opposed to. If you read the details of these bills, you're not really reforming much. You have 2.2 million people behind bars, incarcerated in this country. Best case scenario, the Grassley-Goodlatte bill would reduce incarceration by a couple thousand. It'll be a rounding error. There would still be 2.2 million people in there. The Grassley bill includes 2 new mandatory minimums. Congressman Scott, if you know anything about him, is probably the chief opponent of mandatory minimum sentencing in the United States Congress. It includes 2 new mandatory minimums. They're very minor, as Senator Grassley says. One's for interstate domestic violence, so if you kill your spouse and cross state lines, you'll be subject to a 15-year mandatory minimum, in addition to whatever you'll get for first-degree murder plus the death penalty. It's super, super silly. And then a new mandatory minimum for trafficking weapons for terrorists. But the talking point is, for Grassley, is he can point to, well, mandatory minimums are still an important criminal justice tool and an important and effective deterrent. But the bill reduces 2 supersized mandatory minimums, which is great. I mean, that's the one bone he threw at reformers. But if you read further in the bill, they reduce these 2 supersized mandatory minimums, but then they expand the universe of who would be susceptible to them. And my boss, again, is a purist on this. If you're expanding a mandatory minimum, that's a new mandatory minimum. If someone today wouldn't be subject to that mandatory minimum, even though you're reducing it, that's fine. But if more people are subject to that exact same mandatory minimum, even though you're reducing it, that's a new mandatory minimum. It gets worse in the House. Goodlatte Xeroxed most of that bill and introduced it over here with Democratic support, unfortunately. But it includes a new mandatory consecutive sentencing enhancement for trafficking of or distribution of heroin mixed with fentanyl. Very, very deadly substance. It's cropping up all over the country. Yeah, but the question should be, do we address that as an incarceration? Do we solve that with more incarceration, or should we treat it as a public health? Public health, exactly. Because sadly, a lot of the people that would be caught up in this and would be subject to this, it's a minimum day up to 5 years of additional time that has to be served concurrently. No, consecutively, excuse me. Consecutively. So after, if you have a 15-year mandatory minimum, you then have to serve an additional 2 years on top of that. Probably not the best way to go about it. Mr. Scott, if these bills did come up in the lame duck as they were expected to prior to the election, he was going to vote no. He's He's told that to his colleagues. He's told that to the president. He's told that to the Democratic leader. Because his biggest fear is that we pass something that's labeled criminal justice reform that does nothing to fix the system. Then everyone packs up, goes home for the next 20 years. He teamed up with a very conservative Republican Congressman, Jim Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin. They co-authored the Safe Justice Act. It has broad bipartisan support. I mean, you got the Koch brothers behind this. You get the ACLU as well. I mean, it's a really, really interesting coalition. And the way they approached it, everything has to be based on research and evidence if it gets in the bill. There are no new mandatory minimums in there. The bill's not perfect. There's some provisions in there that the Congressman Scott isn't that ecstatic about, but they don't put it. They're not a step forward and a step backward as the Grassley-Goodlatte bills are. In the reforms we make to mandatory minimum sentencing for nonviolent for drug crimes would drastically limit the number of new admissions to federal prisons under these federal mandatory minimums. So stay tuned on that. You know, he's very much committed to reviving this issue in the 115th Congress. But again, with President-elect Trump's rhetoric on law and order, it's certainly a different environment. And then just one other thing, because the folks that I met with here yesterday, Congressman Scott authored the Death in Custody Reporting Act, which was signed into law by President Obama in December of 2014. It's a very simple bill. It's a data collection bill. It was originally enacted in 2000. He was the co-author with Republican Asia Hutchinson from Arkansas, who's now the governor of Arkansas. It was in effect for 6 years before it expired. Mr. Scott spent the last 10 years, I guess 8 years in 2014, trying to get it reauthorized. It cleared the House 4 times by voice vote, but there were 2 senators that were holding it up in the Senate. But we finally got it through, primarily just because of what was going on in this country. It was just 4 months after Michael Brown and Ferguson, that this is the least that Congress can do to shine some light and provide some transparency to the public on who's dying at the hands of law enforcement, and where are there higher incidences of this type of stuff going on. It's now back in the books. There's no sunset provision, so it's not going to expire. The Justice Department has been dragging its feet on implementing it. There is an effort. They've proposed a rule for an arrest-related data collection program under the Death in Custody Reporting Act. That went out to comment in September and October. They're going to issue an updated version of that in the next couple of weeks. That will also be out to comment. It's unclear how a new administration will interpret the law and if they'll continue the effort to implement it. But I just want to plug what the Daily Kos is doing, trying to bring attention to this. Congressman Scott's going to hold the next administration accountable for not implementing this if they decide not to. But it's an important first step to figure out what is actually going on, and if you see patterns of certain law enforcement agencies that have higher rates of these types of deaths, what can the federal government do to improve the situation and hold those agencies accountable? So with that, I'll finish. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, David. So again, we've gotten an opportunity to take a look at criminal justice reform. I'm going to throw in one thing about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was the years of work that progressive activists have put in fighting the Trans-Pacific Partnership tooth and nail. I want to give a shout out to 2 of the people that have been on the call planning team since about 2012, putting together calls on Sunday nights, meeting on Monday, planning the calls, getting guests, and then being on those calls. So Harriet Haywood and Mara Cohen, please stand up and take our thanks. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you very much. And I also have to shout out, of course, Liz Warren, who is hopefully watching in California, and Adam Weissman, who I know is here protesting something because there's protests going on all around in D.C. He's part of the TPP protest. So we know the TPP appears to be mortally wounded, and we are being very vigilant against zombie TPP showing its horrible, ugly little face. All right, I want to bring up another very, very dear friend of PDA Action. We have worked with them very closely on the TPP and many, many, many other bills regarding fracking and water. I'm going to bring up Liz Schuster from Food and Water Watch. Liz, come on down.
So I just want to thank everyone who worked on TPP as well. We've been working on it for a really long time, and as Andrea said, it appears dead at this point. I don't see a path forward for it, which is incredible. So everyone should just take a moment to really let that set in. It's a huge victory to be celebrated when we're sure it's a victory, and hopefully the next roundtable we can do more outward celebration on this. So congrats, and it's really a great show of strength for the movement. So we've talked a lot about the uncertainty with the Trump White House going forward. But one thing that is seems pretty certain, is that the environment is in trouble in the next 4 years. And Food and Water Watch, we're an organization that organizes. I mean, that's what we do. And so we commit and remain steadfast in our commitment to organize for a more, economically, socially, environmentally just world. And we will be here, and we will fight with you, and we will continue to do so. Andrea asked me to sort of update everyone on what's going on with the energy bill, since it was in your letter drop this past time. And, more uncertainty, really. But the latest I've heard is that negotiators are still meeting. They're going to try to meet, I think tomorrow is the latest I've heard. A lot of people are saying, a lot of high-ups are saying they don't see a path forward for the energy bill. We oppose it. A lot of other groups oppose it. There's some really bad stuff in it. And I think they're going to just wait it out until the Trump White House, because they can get an even worse bill, right? So there's no leverage to really negotiate this now, which is, not good news at all. But, that just means we have to come back and we have to fight whatever they put out. So continue to state your opposition to the administration for this bill. It's still in conference. There still could be a path forward in the lame duck. So just, maintain your opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And since you brought up our letter, I'm going to very, very quickly go through what is in our letter. We are going to be working with coalition partners this month, so thank you, Food and Water Watch, for helping us build that coalition. Included in the letter, in addition to the energy bill that Liz mentioned, is going to be funding for Flint in the House. In the continuing resolution on the Senate side, they did work in funding for Flint. The House did not put funding for Flint in, but they did promise that in the lame duck, they would add funding for Flint. So we are going to be looking for that to be in omnibus, minibus, crumnibus, whatever it is they call the darn thing. We are going to be looking for funding for Flint. The number that I heard bandied about in the news was $170 million for Flint itself, plus whatever they decided they were going to be able to pass for general water infrastructure. We have also added something this month where it isn't really legislation yet. More than 50 tribes signed a treaty back in September saying that they would stand together and protect native lands against any tar sand or oil sands. And right now, there are literally thousands of Native Americans and many, many other people joining them at Standing Rock to protest the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. We have added in our letter to do two things. We have asked President Obama to stop the pipeline, which he can do, which is exactly what he did with the Keystone. He said, we're not going to build it. Gavel down, case closed, no Keystone. He does still have the ability to do that with the Dakota Access Pipeline. But there's one even higher level of support that we are asking people for, and that is to stand with the Native Americans in support of the sovereignty of their lands. Because if we stand with the Native Americans in support of their land is their land, and if they have said no, then it will not be, there will be no pipelines crossing Native lands. They will have to redirect them, and we have already seen that there is an institutional racism in the way they route these pipelines. So the Dakota Access Pipeline was routed through Indian territory or Indian lands because it was originally going to go through Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, that's predominantly white people, and we can't run the risk of poisoning water for nice white people. That can't happen. So we're going to just run it down through the Indian lands. They're Indians, after all. What do they need water for? And again, we've seen that in Flint. Flint, again, is basically infrastructure. It is a racist decision that, we're going to cut costs, and they're just black people down there. They'll never notice. You know, the water will look a little different. We'll just tell them, oh, it's an enhancement. We put vitamins in it. That's why it's brown. Right, yeah, you know, it's like added benefit. Added benefit. You don't have to buy liquid fuel. Added benefit. Just put some water on it. You can light that. You know, everybody's going to want it. So we've done some incredibly institutional racist things as a country, and it really is going to be an interesting time to be fighting these battles, but they really are the right battles to fight. If not now, when? And then, of course, we are reminding our senators and representatives that their leadership promised we would not see a lame duck vote on the TPP. So let's honor that promise and keep the thing in its coffin. Now, again, 115th, it'll probably show up again. But that is basically what we have in our letter this month. So most people, hopefully you'll be delivering your letter next week on Tuesday. We are getting the final approval from partners, allies, and colleagues this week. We will post the final letters no later than Friday, and we will get the events posted as well, and we'll be recruiting extra people to come with you. And hopefully, we will be able to do many more coalition letter drops like that. I will probably be on the Hill with my team on Tuesday. So your members are going to be at home next week. Perfect opportunity to catch them. So that's why we moved the letter drops from this week to next week. Members are going to be at home. All right, now, last roundtable, which was in September, we had a very, very powerful guest who was a mother of a murdered child. Again, this month, we have another mother of a murdered child, and I'm going to have her come up. There was an event or an action at the Department of Justice, and so a number of the mothers are back from that action. So it's Burnett, yes, so Burnett McFadden, come on. Okay, you're coming up here. Come on, here you go. Here you go. All right. So thank you very much for sharing. Her name is Burnett McFadden.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me extend a thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you today about my 3 sons. My 3 sons' names are Randolph, Linton, and Reginald McFadden, who was murdered 6 weeks apart, about 11 years ago. They was murdered what society call horizontal murder. All the reason for us to speak here, every case matter. A mother joy and happiness for her child dies when her heart is broken because her children were murdered. A mother grieves for her murdered child is doing so because she's no longer whole. She walks around trying to manage her days and her life, not knowing if she's going or coming. She must try to carry on with her 99 puzzle with her box come with her box come with 100 pieces. The mother is no longer whole. She is broken, and that's for one child. I have lost a 3. Although each case is different, each mother in different ways. Some mothers find the strength and courage to turn their tragedy into opportunity, inform the society, and to others. Some mothers find it's hard to continue to face another day, to continue to live, or to put on a happy face despite the pain of their loss. Many mothers feel lost, scared, and very alone because they lost a child or a children. It's understandable that they feel the way until it happens to you and others, and their pain. A mother who has lost her child can begin to heal when she has that support system, that special someone who takes her hand and let her know she will make it. A mother should never have to bury her child. There are no words to express this pain. There are no words these incredible strong mothers carry to bury, or they are lost with them forever. Their child will no longer be there for the holidays, birthdays, or other special days. There are no guidelines for a mother for following when she loses a loved one. Nothing to take away the pain. It becomes a journey. No matter how prepared you think you are, you're not. No one will ever be prepared for the loss of a child. When dealing with the murder of a child, there is no such thing as closure. Please do not use closure. A mother loses herself, her identity, her value, her trust. When you lose a child, you feel totally and completely alone. The murder and the grief you feel will make you a stronger and more conscious person than you ever known to be. Time does not heal all wounds. The murder of your child rewrites your address book. You don't get over it, you just get used to it. There is something very special about banding together with the special moms, who I call my warrior moms. They are a very strong and courageous group of women who carry with them compassion and consent for their children. They carry the love for their children everywhere and they go. So we stand together, mother to mother, hand to hand, and arm to arm, and heart to heart. We lift our voices to say enough. Enough shed tears after the loss of another child. We are here to stay today because every case matters. My sons, 3 sons, was college students. They are no longer here. They are murdered. I am the mother of Reginald Murphy. I am the mother of Randolph. I am the mother of Linton. I am the mother of every mother out here in this world that lost a child. And I would like to thank you guys for listening to me.
there are many different kinds of bravery and courage, and that is something, unfortunately, that no one should ever, ever have to face. And again, to have lived through it, not once, not twice, but 3 times is almost beyond belief. So Burnett, thank you so very, very much for sharing with us. So again, we have come together and we are working very, very hard to begin making changes to society, to our laws, to our reporting system, to the entire infrastructure that allows this to happen, and it continues to happen. Carissa, do you want to speak or talk at all about the event today or ish time? All right, I want to bring up Carissa Miller. We've met Carissa before. Carissa is with Daily Kos, and Carissa is the author of one of the petitions that we have circulated. We are talking about doing other petitions and planning other actions where we will be going to visit the Department of Justice and asking them to support us as we work to do the right thing. Carissa has a broken foot, so it's taking her a moment to make it up here. Carissa.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. It's great to be here to talk with all of you. Daily Kos is a really large community of very, very progressive folks that want to, our community wants to lend its size and its strength to some of the most important progressive fights in our country. And this is definitely one that we are passionate about, and one that we realize is different now, given the current presidential election, but our commitment to continue to fight for the victims of and the families of people that have been affected by law enforcement agency terror. We want to make sure that we don't go silent just because the current political climate wants us very much to do just that. And so we are here to lend our strength and size to the very courageous and, what is the word? Inspirational moms that I know that that after the election, I kind of thought, oh my God, I can't stand up. And then I thought of Ishtime Robinson, and Ishtime Robinson stands up. So thank you, Ishtime. She's definitely the person that we've been coordinating with the most. And the petition that we are planning to do is not very, for lack of a better word, sexy. It's very wonky. It's a data collection piece of legislation that we just want to be enforced. It's not a very compelling story, but it is an invaluable tool that we have, and it is an incremental change that we can use our strength to push to eventually accomplish every case mattering and justice for every family affected. Before we do that, we need to be able to show the people that refuse to listen that this problem is pervasive. And so we really feel that the Death in Custody Reporting Act and the Arrest-Related Death Act underneath that will be instrumental in that process. This is a law that already exists. This is a conversation that doesn't come to a halt with I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do, our condolences. The DOJ can do. And so that's why we are taking this angle and continuing a conversation for justice with them, especially over the next 4 years. This isn't the only piece of work that Daily Kos is currently doing. We rolled out calls and emails yesterday and today in support of all of the protests at the Army Corps of Engineer headquarters around the country. We're absolutely 100% behind the Standing Rock reservation, their vigilance, all the protests. We are lending as much support to that as we can. It's almost annoying that this election was in the way of that. But it's not now, and now we're going to continue to fight for that. We also have gotten an extreme amount of interest, given how many popular votes Hillary Clinton got, and the fact that she technically won by a national popular vote. Now the country seems to be very interested in the Electoral College. And so we are, and this is why I brought my computer up, because this is new to me as well, but there is a thing called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and we are going to work at the state level, and we are forming coalitions, we are allocating funds, we have 1.2 million folks that have already, new folks, they weren't part of our community 2 weeks ago. 1.2 million new folks are interested in this. They're like going to be an organization on their own. And although I don't think that it's necessarily, I don't know, the Electoral College has always been a pain, so if people want to talk about it now, great. I don't necessarily think it's the perfect response to what just happened, but I think the Electoral College and taking that down or doing something about it is a wonderful way to go. This National Popular Vote Interstate Compact gives us a way forward where we don't have to amend the Constitution. We already have 188 electoral votes that have signed on to this pact. If we get enough states to total 270 electoral votes, then popular vote will win the 2020 presidential election. That would be awesome. So that is another thing that we're working on going forward. We are, as always, grateful to be here and to work with people demanding action, and that's all I got.
I want to bring up Stephen Spitz next. And Stephen, I want you to talk about the renaming of J.E.B. Stewart High School. We are looking now at a potentially very, very different climate for many things in the southern states, in that racism, homophobia, xenophobia, any kind of weird, silly, strange racist phobia is now looking at an environment where suddenly it is, quote, okay. It is not okay, and as progressives, we are going to have to take that stand that this is not okay. And in many instances, the format and the form is going to be very localized. And Stephen is going to tell you about one such fight that he introduced to me that is right in literally his own backyard. Stephen, come on up.
Thanks, Andrea. First of all, let me tell you where I literally come from on this issue. I was born in Chicago, Illinois on February 12th, which happens to be Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So therefore, my middle name is Lincoln. I am now living in Virginia, which I have been living in for a long time, and in 2003, we moved into Fairfax County, and I find out the local high school where I live, a very diverse community, is Jeb Stuart High School. And the more that you look into this situation, you find out that, okay, there are relics of honoring Confederate generals, but it's worse than that. They didn't name it Jeb Stuart High School because they were honoring a Confederate general. They named it Jeb Stuart High School after Brown versus Board of Education changed the name that it was going to be called Munson Hill High School after the area in which it's located, but they decided to name it Jeb Stuart High School as a signal complete with all the Confederate flag waving as resistance to integrating the schools. This is after Brown. They opened it up as an all-white school. It is still named Jeb Stuart High School in 2016. There are students there. It is the most diverse high school in Fairfax County, probably in the country. There is no racial, religious, ethnic majority in that high school. It's got lots of Latinos, lots of African Americans, lots of Muslims, lots of white people, lots of Asians. It's a very diverse high school. There are students in this high school who are from various different races, religions, ethnicities, and they are increasingly very upset about the school's name that they attend. Now, as Andrea was saying, this is now a real crisis situation for a lot of these young people who feel that their very lives are being attacked. They're going to be deported, they're going to be humiliated, they're going to be rejected, their lives may be in jeopardy, as Bernadette was talking about. They're threatened, and yet the school board in Fairfax County is dragging its feet and saying, well, gee, you know, some people like this name and we want to honor them. There have been a few people, all of whom are white, all of whom are older, and who have said, well, what's so bad about this name? You know, why do you want to change it? But Andrea and I started a petition last year for people demanding action, calling for the name to be changed to a local resident who lived in my community from 1968 until 1993, and his widow still lives there today, 48 years later. And I might add, he and his wife moved in there a year after Loving versus Virginia was handed down that barred a ban on interracial marriages. And the person I'm talking to was married to a person not of his race. And as people are aware, probably, the movie Loving is just coming out right now. I'm talking about Justice Thurgood Marshall. Justice Thurgood Marshall lived in that neighborhood all those years from 68 until he died in 93, and his widow still lives there. And Andrea and I said, why don't we make this diverse school have a name that students can be proud of? Justice Marshall, the person who argued successfully Brown versus Board of Education, which enabled all these students of different races and religions and ethnicities to attend school together, which is the whole idea of Brown. So now it is more than urgent because you have now a president-elect who has insulted regularly during the campaign various people based on their religion or their race or their ethnicity. And it is time that we all stand up and fight nationally and in our local neighborhoods against this. So I just wanted to say that we had a meeting, and David was kind enough to attend, and Andrea was also there, on Sunday. And I was so astounded and pleased that this was a meeting called by Progressive Democrats of America and People Demanding Action. And the attendance was large. The people there were of all races, all religions, all ethnicities. There were passionate people, women wearing headscarves talking. There were Latino people talking about the pain that they're going through, their fears, African Americans talking about their fears. And what we need to do now, urgently, is stand together to fight racism, to fight homophobia, to fight Islamophobia, to fight anti-Semitism, to fight all of this stuff that is out there. The Southern Poverty Law Center released a report showing that there's been an increase in incidents. The Washington Post points out the number of increased incidents of swastikas, of use of the N-word, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, of Muslims being harassed because they're wearing a headscarf. We have to stand together as a nation And we're not in the minority. Combined, we are in the majority if we stand up. So I'm just urging people to take whatever action, both nationally and in their communities, to fight what is going on now in this country. We have to stand up for it. We can't just give up. We can't move to Canada or wherever. This is our country. We have to fight to retain our values. And thanks very much.
Pretty hard to tell that Stephen is a civil rights attorney, right? All right, as we get ready to close, I want to let everybody know that tomorrow in Upper Senate Park, NNU is going to be holding the People's Rally. Bernie Sanders is going to come and he's going to speak. And goody, that's not me. Normally it is. Bernie Sanders is going to speak. As I said, it's Upper Senate Park. If you are on the PDA or the People Demanding Action email list, you have gotten an invitation to come and join that event. And now, one other thing. I had an opportunity to run GeoTV for the NAACP. I had an opportunity to run GeoTV for the NAACP, and one of the things we decided we were going to do is we are going to continue talking to the voters that we reached out to during the election, because we asked those voters what issues were key to them. Was it the environment? Was it voter suppression? Was it education? Was it economic opportunity? Was it health care? And amazingly enough, people gave us an answer. So those openings are going to give us a reason to go back and say, in your local community, we are going to be holding a town hall. We're going to be having an event. And we'll work with a number of other organizations, and we would like you to come together and join us. So as a community, let's work together and find the way forward. And I think this is really what we are going to need to do as progressives. We are going to have to get out of our bubble of speaking to ourselves. We are already all on the same page. We agree. If this election taught us nothing, there are a number of other people that are out there that have no idea that we believe the same things that they do. We have been so busy being smart, we forgot to be good neighbors and to reach out and reach back and make sure that the rest of our neighbors were okay. So I want to thank all of you for joining us for this November roundtable. There is a very strong probability that as soon as Congress finishes omnibus, cromnibus, minibus, whatever they do, that they are going to just pack it in and go home. One side is going to need a rest. The other side, who knows what they need, and I don't know that I even really care. But they are probably going to go home, so we may not be able to have our December roundtable, which was scheduled for the 14th. So I wanted to make sure we took this opportunity to let Representative McGovern come by and speak with us. He'd tried to join us several other times, and it always seems whenever Representative McGovern could come, there was always an interesting drama with the room. So thank you so much for watching us and joining us, and we will definitely see you in the 115th Congress. We are always working in the streets, and we are also always working in the suites. We also know that if we are going to change the power structure, and we have to, we are also going to need to work to change the structure of the power. So thank you very much. Good afternoon. Some of our TPP heroes, Mark Cohen and Harriet Haywood. If we all know if we want to change the power structure, we are going to have to change the structure of the power.